Tell me, what does democracy look like? It can be hard to see sometimes that an idea, a voice, a vote can make a difference. Each of us has the power to turn a moment into a movement. This is what democracy looks like. It's the power to dream of new solutions, the power to look at the world and say, we can make it better. The power to challenge outdated beliefs and right current wrongs. It's music and marches and murals to memorialize and move us forward. The power to use our voices, our platforms, our passion. The power to organize and protest and demand change. The power to be unafraid. Tell me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
You good to cut there? All right. Hello, hello, hello. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the People Power Training Series. Okay, I might be a little too turned up, but I am so happy and excited for today's call. I am just so excited about the lineup that we have today. So as people are hopping into this wonderful training that we're going to have, and folks are joining from around the country, let's get to know one another. So please share in the chat your first name, your pronouns, where you are viewing this training from, and let me know if you're fired up or not. I know that's like a closed-ended question, but I'm just curious if you're fired up. Again, if you're just joining us, please share your first name, your pronouns, where you're viewing this training from, and if you're fired up or not. I will start. My name is Chris Percy. I am the training director here at MoveOn. My pronouns are he, him. I'm from the west side of Chicago, and I am fired up. I just want you to know it is 51 days, and I am so ready. I am here. It's like, I'm ready for the thing. So I'm so glad to be here with you tonight. There are folks from all over the country, so many people hopping on. We have such a special program for you tonight. I am so excited to dive in and to introduce to you my wonderful colleague. I'm going to turn it over now to Kenia Leon.
Thank you, Chris. Hey, everybody. I'm fired up and ready to go. Oh, it feels so good to say that again. Welcome, everybody, tonight. My name is Kenia Leon. I am coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada, and my pronouns are she, her, ella, or queen, if you like. I want to take a moment and center us on our welcome here this evening because we have such amazing energy. So I am coming to you from Las Vegas, which is Paiute land. So I always want to take a moment and center us on the land that we are occupying. So in the chat, please put your awareness of the Indigenous land that you are occupying, as we always want to acknowledge the land and our ancestors that brought us here before. So I'd like to welcome all of you for being here to the final training. I want to welcome everyone, no matter how they identify. I want to welcome all the brave feelings into this space. This is a safe space for learning, patience, curiosity. I welcome your boredom, your curiosity in what this is all about and who our special guest is today. Your righteous indignation, your anger, your frustration, maybe the grief, joy or determination that we all might be feeling. So I'd like to welcome those who are new to MoveOn and those that have been in the fight with us for a while. Also want to acknowledge anyone that's been impacted by COVID-19 in any way. And in general, survivors, thrivers, and just people trying to hold it together, even if it's just for this call. I feel you. Welcome. People of all identities, backgrounds, ethnicities, abilities, and those of all ages that are comfortable with technology or not. Thank you for being here. Those who made it possible for us to be here, whether it was our caretakers, our parents, our friends, and definitely our ancestors. Welcome here. Thank you for being here with us. We are ready to support and empower each other and our communities. So thank you so much, and I will turn it over to my colleague, Sonia.
Hey, hi everyone. Good to see you. My name is Sonia. I'm so excited to be here. I use she, they, ella pronouns. I'm originally from Puerto Rico and I'm currently in Houston, Tonkawa land. And we have a special treat for those of you who've been kind of tracking along for the past 3 webinars. And we have a very special guest. We're so excited to have John Lovett with us here today, co-founder of Crooked Media. Woo! John Lovett is a former presidential speechwriter, as well as a TV writer, podcast host, and a straight shooter, widely respected on both sides.
Okay.
In 2017, he co-founded Crooked Media with John Favreau and Tony Viator to build a progressive media network with show analysis and sweet content. I'm reading clearly that informs, entertains, and inspires action. There, he co-hosts Pod Save America, Yes, and hosts Love It or Leave It, 2 of the most popular political podcasts in the country. And before Crooked, he served as a presidential speechwriter in the Obama White House, co-created a comedy on NBC called 1600 Penn, which was canceled after 1 perfect season, and wrote speeches for Hillary Clinton.
One perfect, flawless season.
Naturally. And John was also once named Washington's funniest celebrity before he left the nation's capital forever. Welcome, John. Thank you so much for
being here. Thank you for having me. Couple notes.
Of course.
You have to say sweet content because the word content has been ruined and there's no better word. And so you're always searching for saying like we create content, but you say that and you sound like you're pitching trunk. So it's just like tough. It's tough, but yeah, we make content, sweet content. And that was my only note. Hi, thank you for having me. It's so great to be here.
Of course.
That's the energy. I feel like we should keep this loose because look, this is a dark time. It's a really hard time. And I'm just trying to, the sky is orange out my window and I am trying to stay in it. We have to stay in it. And it's very hard when society has been reduced to these boxes, but we're all doing our best. Anyway, hello.
It's so true. No, I feel you. Chris, Kenia, and I are gonna flip the script. I feel like you usually get to ask the questions, but we want to ask you some questions, if that's okay.
Great. Let's go.
Yes, good energy. So for obvious reasons, this year has been different, to say the least, and challenging, but there's some silver linings, I hope. And we want to hear what excites you about the movements you've been seeing this year and the upcoming election.
Yeah, so before we started, you told me you were going to ask me a question like this, and we laughed because even saying what's making you excited is almost like a funny question because of how hard a time this is. And I'll tell you, I think like this is I'm feeling very philosophical. I don't see anybody anymore. So here's what I want to say, which is I feel like so many problems flow from people who choose to be they don't want to be sad, so they choose to be mad. And I think right now we have this moment where actually we're all pretty sad, but it's time to choose to be mad. And we have 50 days. We have 50 days to win this election. And what gets me excited, what gets me motivated is, I think about the fires in California. I think about the climate change we're seeing in real time. And I think, we can't solve that in one election. We can't, because we're paying for problems, cultural problems, economic problems, racial problems, political problems that have been accruing and building for decades and decades. That is true of what's happening in California. But we have a chance. We have a chance right now to change the direction of this country. And maybe if we can fight like hell and we can win and we can defeat Donald Trump and we can win the Congress, for the first time in a long time, politics won't just be about the heinous shit we can stop. It'll be about the good things that we can build. And do I believe Joe Biden is the answer to every problem? He is not. I don't think he would say he is. I think it would be shocking if we found out Joe Biden was a solution to all of our problems. But I know that nothing will get better unless we put him in office. And then how much better it gets really isn't up to him. It's up to us. And the thing that I come back to is, I know what happens to America if people don't pay attention. And I know what happens when people pay attention and there's somebody really heinous in charge. But what does it look like when we remove someone as bad as what we have now? remove some of the terrible leadership we have now. And for the first time, we're all really paying attention and holding someone accountable who actually wants to answer to us, who actually sees us as part of the movement, sees us not as people, not as people that didn't vote for him, but just sees us as part of a coalition. What does that feel like? I think that's up to us. And so when I think about getting through the next 50 days, I think what gets me excited is this may be the most important 50 days any of us ever participate in politics. We may look back at this as a true hinge point in our history, and that gets me going. That gets me moving. That's what I think.
That's real. And I think what is, again, thin silver lining, but I think some of the contradictions of our world are really becoming extremely apparent to people, so they can't be ignored. And I think to your point about choosing to be mad and sad together, I think collective grief and mourning is really difficult in this space. So it's really important, this virtual space, I mean. And what gets me excited about these upcoming 50 days is that we can do that imagining of that future world together to create space for that collective mourning, but also space for that future vision of what the world could look like if we're not constantly moving one step forward, two steps back.
I have an actual follow-up question for you, John. This was not on
Hit me, Chris. Hit me.
So I love the framing of go from sadness to madness, because if you're anything like me, I actually am more productive when angry. I do not know what this is about. I may need to talk to somebody about it, but I'm really more productive.
Whatever gets you going.
But I'm wondering for what is your take on the people who are probably out there who say, you know what, I've been mad a long damn time, right? How do you harness it? Because a lot of what we've been talking about on this series is like what you said, sort of harnessing the energy, learning how to have effective and empathetic conversations. How do you take that and ball it up into productivity, right?
Yeah.
When you already from mad as hell to some other level of mad that I don't know if I can say on here because.
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I think the truth is, right, that not to put too fine a point on it, I think there's a lot of white people who discovered what it feels like to be disenfranchised, and they fucking hate it.
Oh,
they hate it.
Oh,
I consider I considered myself. You can know something, and then you can come to really feel it. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a lot of liberals. I consider myself one of them who knew things, but now kind of knows them in a deeper way. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, that speaks to what it's like to observe these last 4 years. I think that also in a positive way kind of speaks to the kind of multicultural, multi-ethnic coalition we've seen take to the streets, which I think is been incredibly hopeful, been just sort of a positive development, the changing. I mean, look, we've watched pundits for months and months say that at some point these protests are going to backlash, and we haven't seen it, right? Yeah. We haven't seen it because people have surprised us. Sometimes, look, I think we can be surprised by how feckless and careless and callous and at times racist people can be, but there's also been surprises by how caring and passionate and committed people can be. We've seen both in these years, right? We really have. And I know that these movements matter. I know that these protests have mattered, from the Women's March to the people showing up at the airports after the Muslim ban to the Black Lives Matter marches. I know they matter because I can imagine what it would be like to live in an America right now where they weren't taking place. Mm-hmm. So I think there are people that have come to experience pain and loss and hardship that a lot of other people in this country have known for a long time. And it's a sad thing that it took this long for other people to see it, but they're seeing it and they're feeling it. And I think that is powering some of this movement that we're seeing. So that's what I think.
Thank you. I'm glad you said that. I'm gonna turn it over. I'm not gonna hostage anything, but I'm glad you said that, because I think even in the way that we have put an intention behind this series is to make sure that we center everybody's experience, right? And so that everybody can feel included. and we know that they're included in this conversation. And I really appreciate you saying what you said, because that is the crux of it. And whoever is experiencing the oppression the most of people that we should lift up to the top always in everything that we do. So
yeah.
Done.
There's a little tiny gay energy at the end for both of us. Little moment.
I love those magical energy sparks. Yeah.
Yeah, and to keep going on this, sorry, 1 second. Mommy.
Yeah.
This is the world of Zoom, ladies and gentlemen.
I think it's great. Here's the thing. Professionalism where everybody pretends to not have an outside life is like is like misogyny 1 inch down.
Yes.
It's that we're supposed to have nothing going on. We all have shit going on. It's great. I'm glad we're seeing it.
Yeah.
And
I'm glad I see dogs showing up on NBC.
I feel like that video of like
what's happening. Here's
yeah, mommy.
No, what? Sorry, I didn't mean to do it. What? No, it's good. You feel like the video with that kid dancing in?
No, yes, the kid who like came in after the North Korean correspondent, like the Korean correspondent walked in. Feels so good. Anyway, I'm so sorry, everyone. Welcome to my world, Latino household.
Yes.
So, speaking of though, I think a lot of the conversations that we're going to be having about these movements are in our own circles with our dogs, I guess, and our moms. But sometimes we as organizers forget kind of to talk to the people in our own closest circle. I've heard like too many stories of wonky people who talk to all of these strangers and then they didn't talk to their sister about voting or the next like local election. So John, I'm curious, how have those conversations in your own life been going? And if you have any advice for people.
So I'll talk about this. So I think there was a moment about a couple months ago. It was when the lockdowns first started and the protests first started. I think it might have been right when Trump marched across the White House and went in front of the church and waved the Bible. And I was so upset. And I feel like I'm always upset. I'm upset when I'm upset about this stuff now at this point too. But I was, and that part of it is like, you know what? I'm not going to lose that. I'm still going to be bothered. That's fine. But like I hadn't talked to my father about politics in a long time. We had some very bad conversations about it. I'll say that. And I saw what was happening, and normally we just avoid it. And I called my parents and I talked to my mother for a while. Then I got on the phone with my father, and wasn't planning to do this, wasn't planning to say this. And I just was like, Dad, before we talk, I just need to know right now. He's in Florida. I just need to know right now that you're voting for Joe Biden. I need you to tell me that you're voting for Joe Biden. Joe Biden wasn't my pick, but I need to know that you're out, that there's no chance. I need to know. And he said he was. And it was important to me. It really was. It was important to me. For me, like most of the friends in my life, like what our conversations are always about are how can I be most helpful? Like most of my friends are pretty engaged, and I talk to them about it. And a lot of the questions I get is like, because everybody's a pundit now, and so like a friend will call me up and say like, should I be talking to swing voters? Should I do this state? Should I do that state? And I kind of think right now where we're at is like it's a little bit like exercise, like what's the best exercise for you? And it's like the one you'll do. It's the one you'll stick with. Mm-hmm. You want to mix it up with some moderates in the Midwest. Go for it. You want to write letters to people that are not likely but Democratic voters. Go for it. Do the thing that you think you can do the most good with and spend the most time on that'll fulfill you and keep you doing it. And that's sort of like been the conversations that I've been having.
I just want to say, Kenia said that moderates are the new cardio. I don't know what that means. But
moderates are the new cardio is so,
Yes.
that is very funny.
You know, because I mean, it really gets your heart pumping when you're like, okay, what trigger word do I not say when I'm talking to this person, right? So it kind of gets your heart rate up. And, you know, I love the exercise metaphor. That's great.
And I think that Clinton Romney voters are keto. I don't know what that means, but I think it makes sense.
I don't know. Can they eat carbs?
It's best not to dive too deep in the analogy.
Yeah.
Doesn't make any sense at all.
I'm sorry for starting on that. Okay. Back to
This is fun. What are we doing?
I don't know, but I think a lot of people relate to that feeling, so that's okay. Yeah, I think that actually is like very insightful though, like the idea of doing like your own little bit in your own little place, because as someone who lives in like a smaller town like in Southeast Texas outside of Houston, it's really easy to like see all of these campaigns and advertisements and programs that just are not targeted to the brown girl, brown family in Southeast Texas. But that's the thing, right? Like part of that is part of voter suppression and voter disenfranchisement is like not even getting like the ad on YouTube from whatever campaign. So I think it's really important for us to, despite the main narrative that we might be getting that like certain voters matter more than others, each of us has a role to play. We all have something to contribute, both like voting wise and then otherwise. And I think it's extra powerful when we combine both of those.
Yeah,
totally.
I also think, sorry, I'm talkative right now.
Go for it, Chris.
Like, sometimes people are looking for the big thing, and like you don't have to do the big thing, right? Like we know that when you look at certain numbers from 2016, that actually there's actually a small number of people that pushed it over to the other side. So like having regular conversations with people that you know can go very far, especially people that you don't know if they vote or not. You know, y'all talk about all kinds of things, but it's like, you don't talk about voting. And then if you ask them, because as an organizer, and we've said this before on these trainings, like as somebody who has organized, you know, I worked on the Obama campaign back in 2012 and have been on various campaigns since then. Like sometimes I will talk to somebody in my family and they're like, "Oh, I forgot to vote." And I was like, "You did what?" No. I was like, "Do you know what when you asked for that $5, did you know what my job was?" He's like, "Yeah." Okay, so why didn't you vote? Like I literally for a living people to vote, and you did not vote. What is your problem? So like even having these small conversations. So some people are looking for the big thing, but sometimes it's not necessarily a big thing. Sometimes it's just your own family, your own friends, your own circle that you can make the most difference.
Absolutely.
Kenia, what are you thinking about?
Yeah, I'm just reflecting on that and, you know, just reading the chat also of this really resonating with folks about in this time of like dumpster fire after dumpster fire, and now we have an election and we're having these same conversations, but there's so much more. I don't want to say at stake because it's always been at stake, but it's so prevalent and like in everyone's faces that like that conversation could go really, really awry this year as opposed to maybe last election. So that's why I'm like really excited about like what we've been able to do in terms of like having those effective conversations and talking to folks and just honestly having the space to do this, right? Like we need to have some joy, some radical joy in the, I was going to cuss, in this craziness that's going on right now, because this helps us get through it. You know, there are lessons in being able to just sit in the moment and smile and laugh and know that our moms are yelling at us or like our dogs are chewing on your feet while you're on camera, you know, just all kinds of things. So we just have to take that in stride and But just because we're not talking about that 24/7 doesn't mean we're not aware of it and that it's not impacting us. So love the comments in the chat about just like being in the moment. Like, we're going to get to all the good stuff, but like, this is also good stuff. So let's embrace it.
Mm-hmm. Damn.
There's just like a story, like a parable that makes me laugh, which is, so, you know, a couple's driving in a rainstorm and their car breaks down and they realize they need a jack to fix their tire, and they see a light up in the window up ahead. And so they get out of the car and they start walking, and it's a steep, horrible hill and they're falling down. And as they're walking up the hill, they're like, what if they're not home? What if they're not nice? What if they don't want to help us? What if they're jerks? What if they're mean? What if they don't like the way we look? What if they don't like that we're from out of town? What if they have a gun? What if they're evil? What if they're this? What if they're that? What if they're just nasty people? What are we going to say if they turn us away? And finally, they've had this angry conversation amongst themselves, worrying about what's going to happen. And they knock on the door, and this sweet old woman opens the door, and the couple says, "Keep your damn jack." And they turn back around and walk away. And I sometimes think, like, Twitter and the kind of cable news and all of it, it's like that angry conversation, right? And I think sometimes we have to remember that, like, when we get up to that door, maybe it's a digital door or a virtual door, like, we have to remember that, like, all that stuff, like, we bring that with us, right? But when somebody opens the door, like, we don't know who's going to be behind that door. We don't know where they're coming from. We don't know what they've been through. We don't know how they're receptive. We don't know why they haven't voted in the past or what's guided them to that moment. And I just think that, like, even though we're amped and angry and sad and frenetic and paying attention, there's a lot of people, look, we have to meet where they are and not come with those kinds of, you know, presuppositions. That's all. And sometimes, that's what I like about this, because this is good. This is the kind of politics. This is positive, and people looking out for each other and talking to each other and working with each other and helping each other. And, like, that's the kind of politics we can practice. Like, we choose what kind of politics we practice. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely right. And, like, I was also reading the chat, and I just want to acknowledge, like, when we talk about strategies and people, what you are seeing right now is actually a strategy. Because when you are trying to talk to people about voting, if you don't have some level of relationship, right? If you do not invest, even if this was a traditional setting where we were knocking on doors, and I've knocked on thousands of doors, surprisingly, I have not lost a pound, but I have knocked on thousands of doors.
Talk to some moderates.
Cardio.
But, like, what you are seeing us do right now is a strategy in turning out the vote. What do you mean, Chris? Well, like, sometimes.
What do you mean? Hey, Chris, what do you mean? Hey, Chris,
you,
what do you mean? Can you just say a little more about that? What do you mean?
I'm so glad you asked, John. Let me tell you what I mean. What I mean is, like, sometimes you have to break the ice to have a conversation. And as an organizer, oh my God, you just want to just outdo me.
You jumped on me. Keep going. I'll put her down. You're right. This is distracting.
No,
You're right.
But, sometimes when you knock on that door to talk to that person, that stranger, you have like a minute to build a rapport. And sometimes that rapport can be a something hanging right outside on the front porch. Sometimes that can be the weather. So like, if you're looking for a strategy, you see one right here. And this relationship building, this talking, is one of the ways that I have engaged my friends in actually talking about voting, because sometimes talking about voting specifically feels like an attack for some reason. But like, when you just like, let's just talk about the real, okay? And let's just have it, by the end of that conversation, I've had vote plans come out of it. So I just want to say that right quick, sorry. Back to you, Sonia.
Thanks. No, I mean, it's so true. I keep thinking about, yeah, in some ways we don't know like everything about what a person has experienced, but we're all living through some of this stuff together. And we, I think, all have learned some new things about the way that racism operates in this country. And the pandemic has been impacting certain people more than others, so that we do know that some people are feeling it more than others. And that, again, is another reason why we need to come with an open mind, completely empathetic, because even within our own circles, people may be dealing with these things and have been impacted by them in ways that they just are going to need support, not just for voting, but also like for beyond, because that's what I hope this politics for us is doing for us, is building a community that is more than just voting. It is a combination of voting and the other stuff we need to do to kind of build this more equitable, just world. So anyway, I wanted to ask John, y'all have the Adopt a State program, which I think kind of falls very much in line with what we're trying to do in terms of empowering everyone to activate their own little vote teams. Can you tell us more about that? How's it going?
Sure. Yeah, so Vote Save America. You can go to votesaveamerica.com. You can sign up. If you look, you're going with MoveOn. I love that. That's great. Find the place that you want to do the work you want to do. I love MoveOn. But we're doing it Adopt a State. Basically, Vote Save America, we launched something called Adopt a State. We have 6 swing states: Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Florida, North Carolina, and Arizona.
Arizona, yes.
I missed one. And Pennsylvania, my adopted home state. Did I say Pennsylvania twice? Michigan. Michigan. Hey, listen. Okay. Look, we'll tighten this pitch. You know what? Let's just, I know this is live. We'll just do it again. No, so if you sign up for a state, you go to Vote Save America, you sign up for a state, and basically we will give you action items that you can take to kind of help in your adopted state. Because the question we got, we have listeners in all of those states, but we heard from a lot of listeners in blue states or red states saying, I want to help. What's the best way I can help in a swing state? So we created this program. We've signed up over 200,000 volunteers across these 6 states.
Yes.
We have a community, an Adopt a State community. It's giving you ways to donate and to help. We also have our Get Mitch or Die Trying Fund, which raises money for all of the Senate candidates that will help us win the Senate back. We've done a Fuck Jerry Fund, which is our Fuck Gerrymandering Fund, to help some local races. So at Vote Save America, you can the idea was to give people a one-stop shop for how they could check their registration, help their families check their registration, find ways to donate, and find ways to help. And just one more pitch, which is if you go to votesaveamerica.com/states, we have information on all 50 states, which is different. Every single state is different about making sure you get your ballot. If you want to vote early, what the rules are for vote by mail, what happens if you don't get a ballot. You can check your registration and check on everything. So that's Vote Save America. If you want to check it out.
Perfect. Thank you. And
was that too much of a plug?
No, right. That was great. That was beautiful. We're gonna tighten up the 6 states list, but
listen. I forgot how to talk. It's fine.
I was just gonna say, fuck Jerry. I love that.
Yeah, any campaign that has a curse word, sign me up.
I have to say, I think legally I need to say fuck gerrymandering. Otherwise, I'll get in trouble with those people.
With all the Jerrys. You get it. Thank you so much. It was great having you on. And now we want to transition to a quick video to keep inspiring us. Stay tuned.
Thank you to everybody. MoveOn. So Chris, Sonia, Kenia, so nice to see you. Thanks to everybody for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Let's do this. Oh my God.
Let's do it.
51 days. Holy shit.
Yeah. Thank you so much, John. You're the best.
Those who are desperately grasping onto an old worldview, holding on to their power and their broken ideologies, are scared. They know that the numbers don't favor them. Theirs is a framework of scarcity and xenophobia, and ours is of abundance and interdependence. Theirs is a story of erasure and subjugation, and ours is a story of inclusion and equanimity. We march. We make change. We matter. We know that when we vote, we win. We know that when our leadership changes, our laws change. We know that when we participate, we can hold them accountable. We know that when we vote, we are not only voting for a candidate and a platform, we are voting to steer the course of our nation's future. From school boards to presidential office, our voice and our vote absolutely matters. We stand up each and every day and demand to be seen and heard, to be treated with dignity and respect. We stand up every single day to fascism, to racism, to bigotry, to colonialism, to sexism, to homophobia, to militarism, to the patriarchy. And this November, we will stand up for what we believe in. We believe in a very attainable future that we are done tiptoeing and crawling towards. This November, we will vote.
All right, welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you so much to John. Please show some love to John in the chat. That was a lot of fun. I am so happy that we were honored to have him with us and to talk with you all. I hope it was a treat for you like it was for us. It was really great, and we're so glad that he was able to stop by. So we are going to dive into our training today. So if for those of you who may have just joined and like, oh, what did I jump into? This is the People Power Training Series, training number 3. I'm so happy this is the last in this particular series, but look forward to something coming up very soon from us. But this is the last training in this series. In this series, we come to be inspired, to learn. We come to challenge some of our assumptions, to strategize, and to plan tactics to honor the history of our communities and to actualize our voting power. We have been taking a more nuanced and equitable approach to the traditional get out the vote training. So for those of you who are looking for sort of standard issue strategies, this is not a standard issue time. So go ahead and put that in your pocket and sit on it like my mother used to say. For those of you like, well, this don't make sense to me, I don't think this is for me, go ahead and put that in your pocket too and sit on it. We are here because we have been doing so much work around the Mobilize to Win program that we have going on. And this program is basically where we get 10 of our friends, at least 10 of our friends, and commit to getting them through the voting process. So that is from voter registration through to casting their ballot. And in this training series, we have been talking about how to do that in a way that is equitable, in a way that is kind, in a way that is empathetic. So please stick with us throughout this journey. Tonight, we're going to be talking about so much. We're going to learn about our voter options and different ways that our training team, Sonia and Kenia, is going to talk through tonight. We are going to understand how these options are different. There's a lot of things that are just different right now. And so it is important for us to just really take some time and just delve into that, and also talk about some things that mean something to us locally, right? So like we have a national election that we are all here for, but like what happens with those folks on the ballot right below that? So we're going to dive into that tonight, and I'm really excited to do this work and jump into this. So again, please take out your pens, your paper, get comfortable. We're not going to be here too much longer, but we want you to really pay attention to this as we go deeper. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Sonia.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. I'm so excited. So today we're going to be talking about voting, voter engagement. We previewed this talking about the history of voter suppression. We've talked about effective conversations. We've talked about framing. And today I want to review that framing just a little bit so that we can spend the rest of the time talking about voting. So next slide. With Logan's Browning's Blessing, who was the person on that video, I watched Dear White People, so I love that show. Listen up. We're approaching voting and community building differently this year, like Chris was saying. And this year we're marching or mailing in our ballots, and we're marching on the streets. These two cannot be separated. And while most of our training today will be focusing on our voting options this year, I want to start by reminding us that voting is important, but it's not a cure for all. Voting is just one of the puzzle pieces. And so are things like mutual aid, solidarity, organizing, and marching. So I encourage each and every one of you to treat your conversations that you're having with your vote team as what they are. They are a radical exercise in care and community building. And they're really a really exciting thing to be doing right now. So we came up with 5 inclusive voter engagement principles, and hopefully this will help you reframe your approach to voting conversations this year. So if you haven't watched our trainings, I just want to review really quickly that these principles were inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement, the movement for Black Lives, and Kenneth Jones's Tema Oku's Characteristics of White Supremacy Culture, and also Black feminist, queer, and anti-colonial scholarship from authors such as Bell Hooks and Audre Lorde. So first tenet is shed ego and center the margin. And what does this mean in the context of voting conversations? Centering the margin really means thinking of the person who has had the most barriers put in front of them and owning the responsibility as vote mobilizers, people who are mobilizing 10 people within your network to go out and vote this election, and helping them even out the playing field. So in a voting context, this means that we're going to think and acknowledge about the many ways the GOP has targeted certain people with voter suppression tactics. And when we talk about why voting is important, we want to talk to them about what is keeping them from the ballot box and what is helping them get inspired. Because by centering that story and centering the margin, we're going to make sure that everyone, including the people who are experiencing the most amount of barriers, can actually make it out to go vote. Tenet 2, shed shame and adopt empathy. So traditional campaigns and voter turnout campaigns are experts at voter shaming sometimes. They come to Black and brown communities and tell us it's our fault that someone like Trump got elected. And this discourse is not helpful and it alienates people. So instead, we want to adopt empathy. This is where our knowledge of voting rights and voter suppression from webinar 2 is super helpful. Again, go check that webinar out if you didn't get a chance to join us last time. And the real question is, why might a person be saying that voting doesn't matter? Usually because they've been told that their vote doesn't matter for a really long time, right? And instead of shaming people for holding those beliefs, we want to validate, ask questions, and be open to having more than one conversation and guide people toward a joint future, a joint vision for a better future. So tenet 3, shed prejudice and adopt an open mind. Another thing traditional voter turnout efforts do is put people in tiny little boxes like this one. They say so-and-so group never votes, and that's why they don't have any power. And how historical is that really? I mean, have we forgotten the concerted effort to keep certain folks from voting even to this day? Have we forgotten the racist, patriarchal, et cetera, forces that have centered rich white men as the sole owners of political power? We don't need to be blaming people for that history, right? So people need instead inspiration and kind of a realness to go vote. An open mind helps people truly, despite being marginalized and feeling cast aside, connect with what inspires them, why this moment is so important, why it's so important to go vote, and it's so much more constructive than vote shaming. So tenet 4, shed cynicism and adopt rebellious joy. I get it. We've been talking about it with John that the West Coast is literally in flames. It is month 7th of the pandemic, and white supremacist hate assaults our senses every day. And sometimes it's just too much. But again, the thin silver lining is that this is an opportunity for us to reorient how we talk to our people, our friends, our family, our community members, and really be there for them in a way that we haven't been before. That looks like marching. That looks like funding very important groups like Movement for Black Lives. It looks like voting. So last tenet, number 5, shed perfectionism and adopt resilience. This last one's really about picking yourself up when this vote mobilizer stuff gets hard. So sometimes I've been seeing in the chat that people have had experiences with forever Trumpers, and obviously that's not the people who this program's trying to reach. But there are some people who might not be the most excited about voting, and those are the people that you are trying to reach this election cycle. So we really encourage you to think of the people who are voter depressed and voter suppressed. And we want you to revisit also the rerailing and derailing tactics that we talked about during the last webinar, because really what this is all about is staying in those conversations, which sometimes you get really frustrated, being empathetic, changing your mindset, and kind of approaching that conversation as a long-term investment to help that person and work through that person through the reasons why they might feel like their vote doesn't matter. And hopefully by adopting these tenets, our conversations will be a lot more reciprocal, authentic, grounded, respectful, and lead to mutual learning. So with that in mind, let's get into the voting. In this section, we're going to be talking about our voting options this year. Next slide. Vote by mail, in-person early voting, and in-person election day voting. And in some ways, we know that voting has changed a lot in the past 6 months because of COVID-19. Vote by mail has been expanded in some states. Some states are automatically sending vote by mail application forms to all of their voters. And some states have implemented CDC guidelines in polling places and expanded curbside voting. So this leaves us with 3 options. We either vote by mail, we vote, and with that comes some different things like either mailing your ballot back or using a drop box, or voting in person. And that can either be during early voting, if your state offers that, or on election day. So there are good things and bad things about both of those. And there is no one right answer for everyone, depending on where you're from, your level of comfort with various voting, what is even allowed in your precinct and county. So it's important that when you're approaching your vote team to talk about voting, you keep in mind that what might be right for another person might not be what's right for you, and that's okay. What we're trying to do is help people explore all of their voting options, what is available to them, and that they pick what makes them feel the best and what's easiest for them. Of course, in other ways, voting hasn't changed that much. It's still like really hard for some people, and that's because of like targeted GOP voter suppression for many decades. And the truth is that impacts both vote by mail or absentee voting, and it also impacts in-person voting. So our job is not to lead people in one or both directions. What we want to do is help people make their own choice about what's right for them to overcome some of these barriers. The cool thing about this is that there are people working to make this easier for people. You're not out here alone. Groups like MoveOn, right? Groups like John's group, we're all working collectively to try to make the process easier, support everyone who wants to vote and who deserves to vote. And so now it's our job individually within our vote teams to also take that energy and do our own little part. Again, regardless of where you are, because the reality is that we're not just voting for a president here, we're voting for certain local elections, senators, mayors in some places, other local elections. So we're voting for a vision or what we want 2021 to look like. And we can all do our part regardless of what state we're in. So next slide. With that, we want to overcome barriers together. There are 3 fundamental stages of voting: registration, access, and counting. And this full process may be unfamiliar to some. And this is where we as vote mobilizers come in to help even people who have voted in the past, because again, some things are different in COVID world. So we're tasking you with the very important job of supporting your family, your friends, and or your community to choose how and when to vote. You're here to remind them that their vote is their power and their vote is their choice. Woof! Their vote is their power is their vote is their choice, and it's also their vote. We'll be presenting information on voter registration, vote by mail, and voting in person in the time of COVID. Hit us up with some questions in the chat, And hopefully we can walk through an experience where we can help you empower the people in your network to make an informed choice. Two things to keep in mind. One is that this information about voting is general. It is very different state by state, county by county. So we want you to please verify all of our guidance where you live, as all of these processes can differ. And also, this information sometimes changes every day, right? Not that often, but because of the pandemic, things might change in terms of certain polling places that are open or not. We don't know that for every single location. So just make sure that you're checking regularly with your local election office for the most current information. But there are some commonalities, and we want to present them to you today. So I want to bring Kenia Leon back up and get us started talking about voter registration.
Awesome. Thank you, Sonia. And I just love that. Like, we could say it again. Your vote is your power. Just chant that to yourself if you're feeling frustrated. So as Sonia mentioned, there are 3 fundamental stages of voting: registration, access, and counting. So if we own our power in each stage of this process, our voice will be heard. So we'll be guiding you through each of these steps. And it starts with voter registration. We have to get comfortable with asking the question, not only are you registered to vote, but are you registered to vote in your current address? That should be like just one sentence that comes out with folks. So we know that in the time of COVID and just so many changes and challenges and lawsuits to local states about what this looks like, voter ID laws, all kinds of suppression tactics that are happening. We want to make sure that when we're having these conversations that we're supporting and engaging folks in our vote team to have these conversations also with a mind towards equity, right? Being sensitive that some folks may not be eligible to vote, and how do we get those folks to help in ways that they can is super important. So we need to first check if our folks are registered to vote. And like Sonia was saying, we want to make sure that you check with your local election board, which is your Secretary of State or your county office, for the actual nitty-gritty details about where you live. Although sites may offer to link you to these places, it's always great to just have that backup to get it from the horse's mouth from where you live. Because we do know that vote purging happens consistently, check if you're registered early and often. It's super important. So registering can be as simple as just filling out a form online, filling out an application, mailing it. Usually just ask for basic biographical information. And in some places you do need to write down your ID information. So again, check with your local elections board. And also voters who need to register or update their registration should do so as soon as possible. You don't have to do it during election season. You could do it any time of year. So again, check early and often, and let's make sure that our registrations are valid and current. And again, your local website will tell you about deadlines for registration. So let's talk about actual voting. Next slide, please. All right. In-person early voting. So we know that this is a question on everyone's mind because of the pandemic. Actual voting goes to access, right? So we want to make sure that if you do have early voting in your state, there are actually 10 states that do not currently have any form of early voting. So we need to make sure, one, does our state offer it? What are the timelines for early voting in person? Due to the pandemic, these hours and times could change consistently. So we need to check with our local elections board and find out maybe a polling site you're used to going to is not open because of the pandemic, or maybe they are totally down with voting and they've opened several more options. So we really need to check with our local elections board to see where they're at. And safety and accessibility is 100% needs to be on our forefront. What does that look like when we go in person? Do we have the necessary PPE? Do they have accessibility options like curbside voting? Do they have options for hours for a fragile population? So keeping all those things in mind might help us formulate our vote plan for early voting. And let's talk about what it looks like for in-person election day voting on the next slide. Right. So we understand that polling stations can change. And a lot of that has to do with, one, the Shelby versus Holder decision, which basically gutted the Voting Rights Act. So we need to make sure that we are following up where our polling places are, what are the rules about our polling places, and what are the times and dates that they're open. If you're going on election day, understanding what that looks like. And also due to COVID, many places might have consolidated or made extra rules in showing up that day. So we know that voting on election day can be a long, tedious process just because of wait times or specific criteria that's in place for COVID. So when we are making our vote plans, we need to think about that. Do we need to bring food? I got a cooler. Let's do this, right? Bring water, PPE, bring your meds. That might help to deal with some aggravating people. Do what we got to do, but stay in line. So a way to battle this, however, is if you do have early voting in your state, that might be a way to alleviate some of these long wait times on actual election day. So again, please take a look at your local state election board. And also ID requirements are super important. Take a look at how or what you need to bring for in-person voting. And understanding that poll workers are there to assist you if you need accessibility options, if you need materials in different languages, anything like that. So please make sure that you ask a poll worker for any questions that you have the day of. Now let's think about what we just talked about. There's some challenges within each of these options. So on the next slide, I just want to talk about one final thing we could do to fight voter suppression at the polls. So counting is the third step in the voting process. When you face any kind of challenge or barrier to vote at a polling place, you do have the right to ask for a provisional ballot. Shout out in the chat if you've ever heard about this or have ever voted provisionally. This was created by federal law in 2002, and it's supposed to be an administrative measure to protect against technical errors that may prevent registered voters from casting a normal ballot on election day. So in other words, let's say there's an issue with a photo ID, say it like fell out your wallet and you don't have it and you're at the polling place. Do not leave. You have the right to ask for a provisional ballot. Federal law requires most states to have some sort of process for this. It usually is called provisional ballot, but there are 3 states, and we always have to have an exception, that do not use provisional ballots in the same way. So it's super important that we just ask, right? We don't know if we don't ask. So counting is super important when it comes to provisional ballots because each state has different criteria as to whether they'll accept this ballot or not. So it's important for 1, ask for a provisional ballot. 2, figure out what you need to do to make sure it counts. Usually it's signing an affidavit or bringing your ID the next day somewhere or whatever criteria each state has set up. But this is your way to ensure that your vote will count as much as possible. So let's talk about these challenges on the next slide. All right. So dealing with challenges, whether it's an ID issue, an address issue, a signature matching situation, or they can't verify that you are registered to vote. In many states, you just ask to sign an affidavit saying, I am registered, and you sign an oath and you're able to vote. The biggest reason for provisional ballots is voting in a different location than assigned. So if you have, let's say you're in your same precinct, but you're not in your actual voting spot, if you vote with a provisional ballot, it may or may not count depending on your state rules. But again, you are able to vote. So again, asking those questions, asking a poll worker. But the number one thing is do not leave. And we have a voter protection hotline that if you have your phone with you, program this into your phone. It's 1-866-R-VOTE. And this is for any state. And if you have questions about voting or questions about what you're being told at a polling site, pick up this phone, call it. If you have access to the internet, they can also live chat with you. So that takes us to our next slide. So pull out your phone. Here are all the voter protection hotlines. 1-866-R-VOTE. And our chat moderators are also putting that into the chat box. So no matter what you need, what language you need, you are not alone. Just please remember, if you take anything from this last 10 minutes, don't leave and vote. So 1-866-R-VOTE, and on the screen and in the chat box, as our awesome chat mods are putting in all the different phone numbers for different languages. So with that being said, I'd like to bring up all my colleagues where we can kind of discuss some voting issues.
Hey.
Hello.
Hey. All
What's
right. So, Woody, that's a lot of information that we just went through. But I would love to hear about what is the time you or a friend experienced a challenge voting and how they overcame it. I think that's a really good way to kind of send this message.
Mm.
Well, I think one of the things here is like thinking about what we just went through, that was a lot of information, right? And so like sometimes it is just as simple, like I've had friends just call me like, what am I supposed to do again? What is the process for this again? Like, I think I have what I need. Do I need to have my ID at the polling place? And so like knowing what the rules are in your particular state, like I live in Illinois where you don't necessarily need to have your ID. You just say your name, they look you up, and you go with it, right? So like there are different rules for different places. And so like sometimes just being ready to like, and you don't have to know all the things. I'm not saying like folks, hey, be an expert, because
there's no way to know all the things, right?
to know every single solitary rule, but it is important to know where to go find the rules, right? And so like for me, I have had a few issues as I've been working in politics for a while, where I've had to like point people in the right direction on what to do. Or if I knew the answer, I was able to do that. But like there have been several times where folks have just called me and like, I don't know what I need to do. I want to go vote. Especially for first-time voters, right? Like first-time voters thing where it's like, okay, I really want to get this right. How do I do this? And like that's why this hotline is so super important and great. Like as people think about like your friends that you might be pointing to voting, like it is important to just to know where to point people, I think.
Yeah, and the reality is that sometimes even when they get there, they're going to get conflicting information potentially from a poll worker, from someone who's in line if they're standing in a really long line. And the really key thing is to have them breathe, not panic, and kind of step by step work through the situation. So worst comes to worst, you know that you can call this hotline, and it's helpful for me to know what I'm calling into. So this hotline basically calls you into a group of national lawyers, election lawyers, who are experts state by state. And they are in real time, not just helping people, but also like accumulating if there's like situations. And they're kind of like in the back end calling if they need to like extend the hours of a certain polling place because like the line is too long or something like that. So it's very useful, helpful information. And it was useful for me to know that when my friends needed to call in, so that they knew what they were calling into, and that it's definitely somewhere where they can ask for help. But it's also useful to know that like you can show up to a polling place, and I've had friends do this, and before they go in, they're just, it's their first time, or like they're confused, whatever. Like they'll text me, they'll call me, and that's what I want to be there for. So Kenia, to answer your question, provisional ballots are very critical in college campuses. So when I was registering voters on college campuses, especially people who were coming in from out of state to Texas, and they didn't have their passports. Of course, they didn't have a license because they're from like a Texas ID because they're from out of state. And they would kind of freak out and they'd be like, can I not vote because I didn't realize that I needed to have my ID with me? Like it's different in my state. And I would tell them not to panic and that it was going to be okay to have someone mail their ID in. But if it didn't come in on time, that's okay, that they can fill out a provisional ballot and then they can verify their ID and follow the instructions that get sent to them and given to them afterwards. So yes, worst comes to worst, right? Like we don't want to be relying on the provisional ballot. We don't want to be relying on voting on election day if we don't have to. But yeah, if it happens, we know that that's an option.
Right. No, I love that. Thank you so much for pointing that out, Sonia, especially in college campuses. Like they're like, sometimes we don't even know where to get mail, right? So like it could just be super confusing. And having like worked at polling sites, I was shocked just to know that like people didn't explain that process. So again, just knowing where to get information from could be a huge just step in the right direction. That could be the difference between someone being able to vote and being disenfranchised. So it's super important. So thank you for pointing that out. And also, I just want to say on that note that like for Black and Brown folks, that we are the highest percentage of folks that are using provisional ballots, right? So if we understand the history of voter suppression and disenfranchisement, like this is like one more step that they try to push to not let us vote. So like our vote is super important and it is powerful, which is why they try to silence it, right? So understand, just do not leave. Pretend it's Black Friday and that TV is $2 and you are waiting to get it. And if you got to knock somebody over to get it, don't knock nobody over at the polling site.
Do you have just personal experience?
that is, that got a little real.
That's a little too on the nose.
That was a little too enthusiastic. But that's just how bad I want to vote. Like I need to cast my ballot and get out the way.
Yeah, maybe don't knock someone over on your way.
No one is advocating violence. I'm just saying harness that energy that we would harness for like an awesome shopping trip and put that to saving our democracy. That's all.
And I will say this for folks who are just joining and like, what are we talking about? Welcome to the training. This is People Power Training, where we are talking about getting out the vote. We are talking about actually voting around the country. And we know that the rules are different for everybody, but we are walking through some of those generalities that we can talk about. So thank y'all for being here.
And bringing Black Friday energy to the polls. So with that, let's take it to vote by mail. So we've talked about in-person voting. And it's hard because for some people, this is not super applicable. Like if you live in a state like Texas, and you're not out of county and things like that, like you're not going to be able to vote by mail. But there are some people to where this is actually super helpful. And if it's something available to you, we want to talk about it. And we want to expose it as one of the voting options we have. So I want to start with a testimonial from the 2018 Georgia election regarding mailed ballots. And this is a quote from Aura from Dougherty County in Georgia and from the Fair Fight group. I am 90 years old and have been sick since January. I requested an absentee ballot on September 12th, 2018. I did not receive my ballot until approximately 1 month later. So it's important to kind of hear again, to that center of the margin idea, hear the struggles that some people have when accessing the ballot, and think and strategize about the ways that we can make sure that that doesn't happen for as many people as possible this election cycle. We can challenge this narrative of getting suppressed out of our vote, and if we come together and we ensure that our vote is counted. So we walk through all of that step of registering, acquiring, and making our voting choice, and then making sure that our vote is counted. So for vote by mail, many states require an application to request your absentee ballot or a mailed ballot. Depending on your state, this will either require printing out a ballot request form and mailing it, or contacting your election official to share your identifying information. Don't assume your state is automatically going to send you your application. So make sure that you verify how you're going to submit this application and that it gets received. I had to vote by mail, absentee ballot vote this past primary, and it was actually like really scary for me, like as a person who doesn't send a lot of mail. I'm clearly young, but I don't send a lot of mail. I don't know what the mail is. It's confusing to me. And it filled me with anxiety knowing that like my ballot was like floating around somewhere and didn't like immediately land on someone's desk when I sent it, like an email or something. So I was calling my election official and I was emailing my election official, and I was like, hi, on this and this date, I sent this and I expect it to arrive by this date. Please confirm that I have received it. And that's not possible in every county, but what we want to encourage is that you send this application request as soon as possible. If you haven't already, please do that. And if you have people on your vote team that are going to be voting by mail and haven't submitted this request, please have them do that, because they can already start receiving their ballot as soon as like late September, early October, depending on wherever they're from. Something else is that in some states, voters need an excuse to receive an absentee ballot. And as of July 2020, voters in New Hampshire could use the disability excuse due to concern about exposure to infection. Make sure that that's still current. Other states like Maine, Nevada, and Pennsylvania, even before COVID, did not require an excuse to request the ballot. So that's just something to keep in mind, because if you live in a state where you don't need an excuse to vote by mail and you prefer that method of voting, or for someone on your vote team, that's definitely something that you need to consider whenever you're deciding how to vote. Like I said, you can already request your mailed ballot, and we encourage you to make sure that you've done that with your vote team on Reach, or if you have our friend mapping guide on our training website, you can fill out the fact that you've already had them both registered, and if they're going to vote by mail or absentee vote, that they've already put in their application, they're already going to get their ballot, and they might have already gotten their ballot in some cases. So it just depends. And the last thing is that we want people to confirm that everyone submits a request, and that they can also submit an emergency ballot request. So this is slightly different. If someone gets COVID in some states, you can request an emergency ballot after the deadline to ask for a ballot has already passed. And that's just something to know, that if you were planning to vote on election day, but then you get COVID, depending on your state, you might be able to request an emergency ballot. So next slide, vote by mail questions. So again, listening to the quote from Aura from Doherty County, she says, I understand that my absentee ballot was received on October 29, 2018 and was rejected because of insufficient oath information. I do not recall being made aware that it was rejected and would not count. So this is really important, right? Because some people don't know that there's a curing process or a process to make sure that your ballot gets counted if it doesn't have enough information whenever you first filled it out. So the first thing is, we want to make sure that when you get your ballot, if you're voting by mail, or if someone on your vote team is voting by mail, they read all of the instructions to the T and they fill it out as it is stated. In the event that that doesn't happen, or that your ballot gets rejected for some reason, we want you to know that. We don't want you to just assume that your vote got counted. So we encourage you to check with your state, however that process happens. For some people, you can just email your election official. Other ways, there's some internet portals where you can check. you need to make sure that your ballot got counted. And in the event that it got rejected, there's usually a process to resolve whatever issue. So if the issue was like a signature issue or an ID issue, you can make sure to get that resolved. Officials can also take a few weeks to send a ballot to a voter. So something that we want to recommend is that you request your ballot by October 12th to ensure that there's enough time to receive and return your ballot. And something else is that ballots need to have the appropriate postage to be delivered. The USPS has a policy of not delaying delivery of completed vote by mail ballots. So send your ballot even if it is short paid or has unpaid postage. And make sure that it doesn't come to this for your vote team, right? Make sure that everyone has everything that they need before they fill out their ballot. The last thing is you really want to make sure to check if your state or county allows for ballot drop-off. So maybe you're not super jazzed about having to mail your ballot. Again, I want to emphasize that like it will get there, it will get counted. You just need to make sure that you do it in a timely manner. But if you have a drop-off box selection where you can just go drop it off at your election office, that could be a better option than waiting for it to go in and get counted. So we really encourage you, if there's the possibility of dropping off your ballot, finding out how to do that and helping your vote team also do that. Next slide. So really quickly, I want to talk about rejected ballots. During the March primary, states rejected tens of thousands of mail ballots this year's primary, setting off alarm bells for November. And COVID-19 will result in likely more people requesting and submitting ballots. And this means that we need to be proactive in building voting plans with our vote team members to reduce the rejection rate. So again, I want to emphasize that this rejection rate is normal, but we don't want it to be normal. We want a new normal where we have more ballots counted, and we know that certain people sometimes don't get their ballots counted at a disproportionate rate, and we want to also challenge that reality. So next slide, I want to talk about common reasons for rejections and how we can reduce that. This picture is from a rally outside of Montclair, New Jersey town hall this past July, where protesters hung 1,001 absentee ballots to represent the number of votes that weren't counted. And this is a visual representation of what we don't want and also the power that we have to make sure that it doesn't happen. So the most prominent reason for rejection is typically that ballots are delivered late. Late ballots were rejected at rates greater than 1% in Florida, Nevada, New Hampshire, and Pennsylvania, which accounted for more than 10,000 rejected ballots due to a late arrival. We'll have to do that, people. Like, it's September, make sure to get your request in, make sure that you're tracking your ballot whenever it arrives, and make sure to send it as early as possible. In some places, if you get your, if like your ballot is accepted late, like if an local election group wins a lawsuit, maybe it can get counted, but you don't want to depend on that, right? So we just want to make sure that it's in, it's on time, and that you've confirmed that it's in and it's on time. The second most common reason ballots are rejected is for missing signatures or mismatched signatures. So missing signatures often occur because the ballot instructors might be unclear to someone, or they have really small print instructions. And that's okay. So just know that sometimes signatures are required, often signatures are required. They're required on different places depending on the state. So just make sure that you read the instructions really, really carefully to make sure that that's okay. Something I already saw on the chat was that sometimes they get rejected for a mismatched signature, and this often happens to neurodiverse individuals who maybe have like a condition that makes it difficult to keep a consistent signature, or older people even. A way maybe to update this is to change this, to change the likeliness of that person's ballot getting rejected is to update their registration. To make sure that they have a current signature that they can match this election cycle. Another thing is that we want to make sure that we are preemptively attacking this problem, right? So we can't control how fast our ballots get sent out or get brought in, but we can make sure that we do all of this process as soon as possible and as soon as it's we're able to do that. So requesting ballots already open. We can already start getting ballots in some states that hasn't opened yet, but when it does, make sure to get that ballot in as soon as possible, not only in a timely manner, but in a correct manner. And if you end up requesting a ballot, by the way, and this is just for your vote team to know, but you change your mind, or it just doesn't come in on time, and you feel like you're afraid to do the vote by mail thing, that's okay. In all states except in Kentucky, and make sure to check that, but in all states except Kentucky, you can still go in, vote in person after you've requested a mailed ballot, as long as you don't submit that mailed ballot. Obviously, you can't vote twice. That's illegal. But yeah, that's just something good to know in case it doesn't arrive in on time. Cool. Okay, so next slide, please. Great. So I'm not sure if you can see this float chart, but basically I just want to take a breather. We've talked about your voting options this year, 3 of them, remember. So absentee voting, vote by mail, that's the first one. Voting in person, early voting, if that's available in your state, or in-person election day voting. So this is just a reminder that we all have voting choices, we all have voting options, and we all want to make the most informed decision based on our own specific situation. So here's some questions that you might want to ask your vote team to determine what is their best option for them. Are they eligible to vote? Are they registered to vote at their current address? Have they checked that? Again, many places purge voters. We want to make sure that their registration is active and has been checked recently. Does their state allow everyone to vote by mail? Do they live in a state where COVID-19 is a valid excuse to vote by mail? Do they feel comfortable voting by mail? Does their state offer in-person early voting? And if you're voting by mail, is there a drop-off box where you can leave your ballot? All of these questions are really important to ask, because not only does it determine, first of all, what you're eligible and even legally able to do, but it also determines the comfort level that some people might have. And it helps you also teach people, right? If they've never heard of early voting and they're afraid that they're going to be busy on election day because of work or something, in a state where they can early vote, that's a really good thing, right? That's a good alternative to having to vote on like exactly one day out of the entire year. Similarly, like maybe they're a little bit scared about voting by mail for the first time, and they just need to know that the process is really safe, secure, but that we need to be proactive about making sure that our vote is counted. And you knowing, for instance, as a vote team captain that and a vote mobilizer, that we can make sure that we sign the places where we need to sign, we seal the envelopes that we need to sign, we can maybe drop off our ballot at a Dropbox location. Having all of that key information in your toolbox and giving that to your vote team members, I hope is going to assuage their fears and anxieties and help them feel more comfortable with the idea that definitely their vote can count if we just make sure that it's going to. So next slide. With that, we want to create vote plans with our vote mobilizers. Vote planning is a technique to ensure voters turn out to the polls, and the goal of a vote plan generally is to encourage an individual to envision themselves voting and identify any potential barriers they might have or encounter. Developing a vote plan can be a very easy informal thing. You don't have to make people like write anything down on a piece of paper, but it can be as simple as asking 4 questions. Do you have a mail-in ballot, or do you need to request one? And this is, of course, the vote plan for people who are voting by mail. So we'll have one for in-person voting in a second. Second question, have you researched candidates or questions? What day are you mailing it? Do you need a ride to the post office or Dropbox? Have you signed your ballot? Have you used all the envelopes that came with your ballot? And do you need postage? That seems like a lot, but again, it's the very simple process of I got a ballot, I need to mail it back or return it, and I need to do it in an accurate way. Next slide, please. The other way that you can ask a vote plan in person is by asking more relevant questions. So to that, developing a plan for someone who's planning to vote in person, either early voting or on election day, will be what time and day will you be voting? Where are you going to be voting? So what polling location? And it's really important that they check because sometimes those change between different times. How are you getting there? Do you need a ride? That could be something that you as a vote mobilizer can provide to your vote team. Of course, within like COVID measures. Who else can you bring with you? Do you need to take off work or secure childcare? And in states with some really intense voter ID laws, do you all have all the necessary documents to vote? So those are the most important things to ask. again, it doesn't have to be like a really formal process, but it definitely is something that has been shown through research that if you walk someone through exactly what they're going to be doing and not just like, yeah, totally, I'm going to vote, it helps them actually think about it and enforce the fact that they're going to do it, how they're going to do it, and that they have kind of an accountability buddy to help them get through that process. So now I want to bring Chris and Kenia back to do a little reflection, and we want to talk about just generally, what challenges do we think that our vote team is expected to encounter when deciding which of their voting options to go for this year?
Yeah, I think that there's so many options that people are learning about that it might feel overwhelming, or there just might be some fear in general because of the pandemic. So I think that having a vote plan can kind of alleviate both of those, right? Like, I have plan A, it's this, this, and this. And if this goes wrong, then I have a backup plan. So I love the visual of the flow chart. I think that's super helpful to just be like, okay, there is some direction here to the madness. So I think that is super helpful to know what we can do and to have that empowerment of knowledge to know what questions to ask as well.
Ditto. I mean, I was trying to think of
brilliant, Kenia, just brilliant. You've solved voting.
Yeah.
Hey.
What she said.
Leon 2021. All right, thank you guys. Just want to say that like all this energy around the presidential election is definitely top of mind for us. So like knowing that there are several things on the ballot that's going to be super, super important for us, right? So I want to transition us into local elections and how powerful, like, this legit is where we can make change happen like immediately. So this cycle is giving us an opportunity to affect change not only federally, White House, our house, the Senate, the Congress, but also in our everyday communities. So next slide, please. So from the White House to your house, it's super important to understand what's at risk. This is a fight to retake the White House, to get the majority in the Senate, because we've all seen what Mitch McConnell has created in that graveyard of bills with nothing moving forward, and to maintain the majority in the House. We had a huge blue wave in 2018. So we need to, one, keep up that momentum, take back the Senate, and get this fool out the White House, right? Like, that is the plan. So understanding that that is what's at stake federally. But if we go to the next slide, we're going to see what's at stake in our local communities. It's also a battle for our local elections. So this is a fight for our communities, and down ballot races, which is a term that you might have heard before, is just basically from top of our government locally all the way down to, dog catcher in some places, are on the ballot, right? That's why Charlie Brown is hanging out over there. So understanding that the importance of our local government, nothing has really shined a light on that like the pandemic. We have seen governors and mayors stand up and to keep their community safe. And we've also seen some that haven't, right? And that impacts us daily. So understanding how much power and ability to govern we have in our local state governments has really been highlighted with the COVID-19 crisis. So if you feel like what's happening nationally isn't matching up locally, it's because of your local government. So that could shine a line on how important our local elections are. So I want to transfer to the next slide just to give us a perspective of how important our local offices are. Like, have you ever heard that all politics are local? Local politics help shape federal policy from the ground up. We would not have marriage equality if it did not start in the states. Women's suffrage, minimum wage, the EPA, all that began at the local level. So voting for offices that make an impact to the reforms you want to see is essential in making change in your community. For all those that are crying to defund the police, that starts at home. That starts in your house. That starts in your community. So it is super important that we understand that if we want criminal justice reform, we need to know who our attorney general is. We need to know who the district attorney is. Are they progressive or are they just like locking up folks? So we need to be able to hold our folks accountable. And this is government we can touch. We literally see them at the grocery store. Well, we used to. We might see them through a mask now, but they out there and we can hold them accountable. So to kind of show how important our local elections is, I want to take us to the next slide. So a lot of times, especially in our communities, we kind of hold on to the narrative that our vote may not matter or our vote may not count. But that is a narrative that folks want us to hold so we don't use our power. So the impact of our vote locally is that it creates local change. So again, police accountability, affordable housing, your education budget. Is your state a sanctuary state or county? Marijuana ordinances, all that is controlled by our local government. So voting locally affects change immediately in the change you want to see. So when we say we're building the community we want to build, there is no greater power than in voting and making that happen. So it's important to think about how and why we vote locally. And knowing that we have elections on years that aren't as popular, for us to also use our voice in those midterm elections. So to give you an idea of what local change looks like, I'm going to take you to the next slide. So resistance begins at home. So here are some recent local wins just in the last couple of months about what local power and local voting can do. So North Carolina City Council passed reparations. They're giving money to their Black residents for businesses and home ownerships and have really started that conversation about what reparations could look like. Can you imagine, y'all? That started in one city. Imagine what we can do. We have several offices tying cuts from the Minneapolis Police Department. Philadelphia canceled a $19 million increase to the police department and shifted $14 million of that to anti-poverty measures, which include affordable housing. So think about the change. Everything we're fighting for, our battle cries in the street, they start at home. So it is super important we vote in our local elections. So with that, on the next slide, I need you all to know that your vote counts. These local elections are sometimes decided by one vote. Just one. Like, think about that. Our voice could have been the voice and made the difference. So the smaller the election, the bigger impact your vote has. So think about that when we're sitting here maybe feeling like we're getting lost in the sea of like electoral college or like voter suppression. Our voice matters, and it is important that we create the change we want to see. So with that, I want to bring up my colleagues back up to the stage. And I would just love for everyone to just put in the chat really quick and ask my colleagues about one local issue that you're excited about.
Oh, there's so many. Something that I really care about in Houston is obviously climate change. I think that when I talk to people about like what gets me fired up and like really important moments for me politically is that same year where Harvey hit Houston and Maria hit Puerto Rico, which basically hit 100% of my family in both of those places. So anyway, the thought that our local elected and federally elected officials have made years of decisions to build up to the reality that we now live in is just horrifying. And the way that also that plays into environmental racism and also gentrification. So prioritizing corporations and profit over literally the ability of people to breathe and literally the ability of people to live in the place where they've grown up and where their family has been for generations is just I don't know. It gets me really emotional. It's really important. So I think that's something that I know is going to keep affecting people more and more. And it breaks my heart that that's the reality. So it gets me really motivated to know that we don't have to have an orange sky. Anyway.
Yeah, that is such a, that's such a loaded question because there's so many issues. And like, for me, it's always about the intersectionality of everything. And for those of you who are like, what is intersectionality? It's like how things sort of like cross in sort of the world of issues. So for instance, like when I think about race and and the environment, right? There's an intersection there, right? We know that, as Sonia was saying, like if there are climate or environmental issues that hit people of color first, for me, it is, the movement for Black Lives has been something that, I mean, I'm a Black man, in case you all haven't noticed, melanin rich, right? So like, I live in Chicago. I've experienced a lot as a Black man, and also not just as a Black man, but as I look at my Black sisters and my Black folks who are trans and Black folks who are LGBTQ, all the intersections of race and everything. It's almost overwhelming to think of all the issues that are important to me, because I think that they all are important, and I identify with a lot of different identities. And so like, to bring those issues to the forefront, like I was somebody who worked in 2013 for marriage equality in Illinois, right? Before it became a thing nationally, right? So like, and for me, it wasn't even just about marriage equality per se, because when you talk to people of color who are same gender loving or LGBTQ, it was about access to healthcare, or the fact that most of the young people who are homeless in the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois identify as being queer. And so like, it's so many issues that when you start breaking it down, it's like, oh, so much work to do. But I'm encouraged. And that's why I keep fighting. That's why I sort of, really have to even check myself. And when you look back at the trainings that we've done beforehand, and talking about empathetic, effective conversations, sometimes I have to like redefine that for myself, because when you work on issues and people say that this, voting is not a thing, you want to go off, because it's like, look, I'm not working my ass off for nothing, right? But it's like, but also you have to understand that folks have like, that is a part of voter suppression that has been placed on people to think their vote is something that doesn't matter, and it reverberates from the time you step. Not even from the time you step out of your door, from literally, when you think about folks like Breonna Taylor, she was in her home, right? So literally from in your house, in your bed, all the way to wherever you go, the issues are important.
Right.
Yeah, and I was just going to add to that the reality of policing in our country is that it can't exclusively be fixed by voting. So that's also something that we're fighting, is this kind of like white savior messaging about how voting is just like a silver bullet that solves everything. And that's just not how it is, but it is a part of the things that we need to do. So yeah, anyway, everything that Chris said, plus, it gets really hard sometimes to see the way that some people are constantly racialized, how they have to experience homophobic and transphobic violence every day. And that's what's really cool about this too. I also want to reach out to the people who are cutting turf on Van and are super voter people, that it's so important for you to not just be doing that, but also to be plugging into the ways that you can support your Black and brown friends, your houseless friends, the people who are really struggling right now, and thinking about how we as people who care about voting need to care about the issues that they're have been fighting forever, and that maybe that you've just started hearing about. So we need to be doing better also as organizers.
Yes. Well, y'all, for everybody who's here, I know we have gone through a whole bunch of information on this evening. There's a lot that we have talked about, but there's a lot going on in the world, and we try to make sure that we match the moment. We had some laughter, we had some serious moments, we had a lot of instruction, a lot of information giving, but that is what's needed right now. I want to say, as we conclude this final training of this series, a huge thank you to Sonia and Kenia for all of the work that you have done and put into this. This would not be without your work. That is the honest to God show enough Ishkatai truth. Like it would not be a thing without you. And also, people cannot see them and they don't know might not know who they are, but Jordan and Olga, I thank you too. You cannot, and you know, folks at home, you might not be able to see them or hear them, but without them, this would not be a thing. And I just want to thank them for working behind the scene and troubleshooting. And to all the chat moderators, thank you so much. Thank you for everybody who said anything in the chats.
What a great team.
I want to take this time and just say thank you to everybody who had a hand in this training. The work is not done though. This is just this particular training. So some next steps, go to mobilize2win.org for all of your program needs. There you can sign up to be a vote mobilizer. Again, what we are doing, we are finding at least 10 people in our communities and getting them from registration to casting that doggone ballot. So go to our website, and there are so many tools there to help you with this. You can look at every training that we have done. This training will be up by the morning. You can look back, take your time, pause. There's a lot of information here. That's cool. You can just go through there, write some stuff down. Make sure you go there. You can get access to all of the trainings, all of the materials that we've created for you, the additional resources like friend mapping guide, story of self resource. There's going to be a vote planner document for you that help you just think about how to actually create your vote plan with your people. So yeah, it'll be all there on the website. Next thing, complete your vote plan for yourself and everybody in your vote team or everybody that you are talking to about voting. Do it immediately, okay? Create a vote plan for everybody. Like, it's really important to do that. And look, we are 51 days away from Election Day. There's a lot of things that can and will happen in between now and then. But look, we have so much work to do. We cannot afford to be sidetracked or dissuaded, distracted. Charlie Brown can't come and burn. I miss Charlie Brown. We are in the middle of so much happening in this world. However, look at your neighbor and say, however. Type in the chat and say, however. We still have the power. The reason why we named this training series People Power is because we have the power as people. And so do not let anyone dissuade you from your power. Make sure that you register to vote. Make sure you tell your mama to register, your kids, your husbands, everybody. Tell everybody you know to vote. Tell the people you like and the people you don't like. Everybody needs to know that it is time to vote. And learn what the rules are for your state. It is varied and different for each state, but please make sure you do that work. And so I just want to say thank you. Thank you to each one of you for all of your attendance. Thank you for listening to us. Thank you for trusting us with your time. It's a Sunday night. There's a verses going on with Patty and Gladys that I'm about to go and listen to. I just really appreciate your trust in hearing from us. And last thing I want to say is, like I said it before on all the trainings, this series has been dedicated to the late great John Lewis, who it is so amazing. Like, he just passed and left us, but like we are still doing the work that he spent his life doing. And I'm gonna tell you this for sure, that I'm gonna keep working just like he kept working. And do not get discouraged in good doing. You know, don't be discouraged as we go through this process. We can and we will win. So make sure you tell everybody you know, your mama, them, your cousins, your friends, and your enemies, unless they go to nobody else, to go vote. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Thank you and have a good night.
Elections matter. Justice is on the ballot. Justice is on the ballot when 1 in 5 mothers has hungry children. Justice is on the ballot when millions of people just lost their jobs, many of whom did not have paid sick leave, paid family leave, many of whom don't have affordable childcare. Justice is on the ballot when we look at the disparities around whose children and where they're living geographically have access to broadband to be able to be educated at home, much less have a laptop. Justice is on the ballot when you look at the disproportionate number of African Americans and Latinos who have been afflicted with and have died from COVID-19. Justice is on the ballot when people in our country are struggling like they are right now. So we got to get everybody out to vote. We got to take back the Senate. We got to retain our majority in the House. And we need to win the White House and elect Joe Biden.